Hello, everyone. Welcome to another weekly episode of Shadow Space. My name is Laura Brown. I am your host. And for all my returning listeners, I just want to say thank you. You guys know your support means the world to me. But I also want to make one thing clear because I caught myself last week and just want to let you all know whether you're new or returning to my podcast, all of you guys, my listeners, you mean the world to me. Thank you so much for supporting my content and for spreading the word about my podcast. It means the world to me, and you all matter to me. Again, whether you're returning or you're a first timer here, I just want you to know that I'm really, really appreciative of your support. And I shared last week my excitement for discovering that I have people tuning in from Ireland, and it's just so exciting to see where people are tuning in. And hopefully this podcast is serving as a valuable resource to all of you guys out there, no matter where you are in the world. And so I just always like to start out by showing some gratitude to you all for that, because it means the world to me, and it really makes me so excited to know that I have, or to know that the podcast is having some reach, hopefully all over the world, and really helping people, because that is really the goal of my podcast. So if you are new, however, and not familiar with who I am your host, Laura Brown. And I am a trauma-informed meditation as well as a breathing coach. And I publish weekly episodes on topics related to self-discovery, self-development, introspection, working with the shadow, which is most often just the hidden beliefs that we hold about ourselves, the patterns that we have about with ourselves, and some of the unconscious ideas that we hold about ourselves, and so much more. I really just created this podcast to help guide those who are seeking a deeper understanding about themselves, or wanting to know answers, or just simply wanting to know more about themselves and how they can improve in areas where they may feel stuck. However, I do cover sometimes some really sensitive topics. So I always like to share a full disclaimer that I'm not a licensed therapist. And by all means, the topics and ideas that I share on my podcast are not meant to diagnose or treat anyone. The topics that I discuss here are references to my own personal life, my own personal journey, and my own personal experiences. And that's really important for me to say, because I know it's really, all of our well-being is extremely, extremely important. So I always like to advise anyone who I speak to, especially if you're suffering in a certain area of your life, to really reach out and seek the support that you may need. There's so much professional help available. And I as well, I'm happy to be a resource for you guys if you need any guidance in that area. So feel free to reach out to me as well. Feel free to reach out to me either via my socials, which if you are looking for to follow me on Instagram, my social is at Shadow Space Healing, and on TikTok it's at Shadow Space Healing, and my website is shadowspacehealing.com. So feel free to reach out to me either via socials or on my website, or leave me a message here. I will make sure to link all of my socials on my profile page here as well. Okay? All right, so with that being said, I have an awesome topic for you guys today, something that I've actually had to deal with myself personally a lot this past week. And so I wanted to bring it to the forefront here on my podcast and just really discuss some of the experiences I've had, but also my perspective on this. So today's topic is about self-criticism. And I'm going to pause there for a second, because self-criticism is something that I have dealt with my entire existence. And I'm sure some of you out there can also relate to this. But I'm not going to sit here and pretend to be a hypocrite and tell you guys I know everything about self-criticism, because quite honestly, it's something that I am still overcoming. And I was reminded of this, especially this past week, with everything that I have going on, with the launch of my website coming up, with, just establishing myself on social media, and just, trying to navigate my podcast, and so many other things that I have in the works. I was reminded of that so much this past week that I think it's worth having a conversation about it. Because no matter who you are, no matter what you know, no matter how much you think you know, I think self-criticism is very valid for all of us to a certain extent, And so for me, it, showed up so much this past week that I didn't quite really even understand why that was happening. But as I took time to reflect on it, I can kind of see the reasoning behind it. And I'm not going to dive into all of that with you guys because we would be here for hours. But my perspective on self-criticism is this. Here's what I know. So self-criticism, I think, is something that obviously we internalize. It's things that we do or say, or habits and behaviors that we engage with that sometimes, as I always talk about on my podcast, they're not known to us, right? A lot of the things that we do, a lot of our hidden patterns and unconscious behaviors are not always in the forefront. We're not aware of why we do the things that we do. Otherwise, all of us would be able to fix the issues, or at least to address the issues, right? And so for me, for example, I grew up in an environment where criticism was at an all-time high. It was the focus, it was always the main event. And so growing up, I was always taught to criticize myself because of that. There were times in my family where the criticism was so incredibly harsh. And a lot of that criticism, I know, did not come from a bad place. It's just, the way the folks I grew up with, that's the way they grew up. And this is how we pass things on to others unconsciously, because a lot of us are not aware of the things that we do. But when I reflect back on why I criticize myself so much, I can see the trace and the roots of where that comes from. And for me, again, it comes from my upbringing. It comes from my family dynamic and how I was raised. There were instances in my life where, I would be criticized for the wrong reasons, not always the right reasons, because I think there is, a positive aspect of criticism when it's constructive. But then the negative aspect of criticism is when, your seemingly faults are pointed out to you. And that's sort of how I grew up. A lot of things were magnetized for me. The way I looked, for example, was always on the table. It was always a topic of discussion because I didn't look very similar to the rest of my family. I have very unique features, as they do, but those things were pointed out to me in a negative way. So physically, I learned, quite honestly, to hate some of the things that some of my physical attributes, because of the way it was presented to me, and it's so incredible when you start to look and unpack these layers and see where things stem from, because it's not always what you think it is. Right? And so I'll hear people, for example, friends or acquaintances or people that I've met in my life who say, "Oh my God, you look great, and you do this, and you are so this, and you are so that," and complimenting me. But internally, I should say it again, internally, I never saw myself that way, just because of the way I was brought up and my conditioning around that, right? And so I think for most of us, this is how we learn these behaviors of criticizing ourselves. And again, no matter who you are, no matter how much you know, at least in my perspective, that is not something that disappears automatically. It doesn't go away. It's something that we have to actively work at. And for me, this past week, it showed up in my professional area It was, I wasn't happy enough with everything I was doing. There was always an issue that I could find. There was always some level of criticism. I was not good enough at this. I wasn't good enough at that. And I'll also share with you guys that I am currently taking guitar lessons, guitar classes, and it's my first time ever playing a musical instrument. Well, I played a musical instrument in high school, but it was the flute. I don't really consider that a musical instrument, even though it is. I mean, it's the flute. It's kind of, I don't know, in my perspective, boring. So I never say that I played the flute, but I've always been drawn to the guitar for some reason. And this past year, with all the transitions and the changes I've made in my life, I decided to give it a try because I don't know why I was drawn to the guitar, but I was. But anyway, that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is my teacher has been challenging me every week to do different things. And so one of the things he challenged me with is to write. And, I started to write. I wrote my first song a couple of weeks ago, which, listen, guys, you better watch out because it's going to be a record-breaking hit very soon. It's coming near you very soon. And you will see me on that Grammy stage. I guarantee you that. That's how amazing the song is. Anyway, he's been pushing me, challenging me. And so I've been writing. I've been getting in my creative, mode and just writing, and then learning to play, obviously, the strings and, everything. The guitar is so complicated. So I went to class this week and I wrote my second song, which again is going to be another smashing hit very soon. And so I was showing him what I wrote and I was just talking to him. And the first words out of my mouth is, "This is really bad. This is really horrible. I'm like an F student." That's what I said to him. And then he looked at me and says, "Are you kidding me? This is A+. You've never played the guitar. You've never played an instrument. You've never written music." He's like, "I'm actually so impressed by you because there's so many things that you are doing that people who are very advanced are doing. And you're doing these naturally, And so he said that to me. And then he stopped and looked at me and said, "You are too critical of yourself. You are way too critical." And that really kind of stopped me dead in my tracks because it wasn't the first time I heard that this week. So I was just like, oh my goodness, maybe I am too hard on myself. And so then I started to kind of look at all the things I was doing this week and just all the negativity and the self-criticism that I was kind of willingly participating in. And that's what jumped out at me. And I said, oh, here's the pattern again. And here's what I'm doing. And so I share this story with you guys to say that the way we're conditioned sometimes shows up in the most unexpected ways, in the most unexpected places. For me, it was in my career and it was in my, just my hobbies and the things I was doing. But I wasn't aware of it. People were calling it out for me. And, and self-criticism, that's kind of what it is. It's so hard because it's an internal dialogue that you're having with yourself. No one can really look at you and say, "Oh, stop criticizing yourself. You're doing it too much." Because it's not visible. Nobody knows what's happening within you. You know what you're doing, but sometimes you also don't know what you're doing. Sometimes you're very unaware of it because it's been a pattern. It's been, something that happens so naturally and it goes on and on and on and on. And so self-criticism to me is rooted in, just how we were conditioned, how we're programmed, some of the things that we may have experienced in our life and how those things show up in our life. But also when they show up, we have to allow ourselves, the grace and the compassion to work through those things, because it can really carry a heavy weight on us, when we realize some of the things that we do. And so for me, when I heard all these, the commentary and the feedback I've had this week, it really kind of stopped me to listen to myself a little bit more and to look at myself compassionately, because as my teacher said, he's 100% right. I've never played the guitar. So how would I even know how to write music at this point in my guitar exploration journey, is what I call it? How would I know this? I've never, ever played the guitar. I've never written music in my life. And, this is my second month doing this. And I'm already at the point where I'm writing music, which is actually pretty impressive, as he said. And so, we need to learn to give ourselves grace, because I think what we do, and we do so well, is we continually, we continually beat ourselves up. We continually, criticize ourselves to the point of no return. We are constantly, hard on ourselves. And for me, it's not just in my professional career, it's also physically. As I shared with you guys, the way I was brought up, it was the physical attributes that I had growing up were so different and were so unique that I guess, in my family's perspective, it was up for criticism instead of being celebrated for my physical attributes. I was criticized for it. And so I became hyper aware of my physical attributes. Some of the things I shared in previous episodes is my head, the size of my head. Granted, they have a point. I have an enormous head. I have a ginormous head. And it's fine. I've learned to accept it, because there's a lot of genius in this head. There's a reason why it's so massive, I have to have space to create. So I need all the space in the world. And I was gifted with the space and a gigantic head. But the way it was presented, it was not in an endearing way. It was more in a very critical way. And so I looked at myself negatively for a very long time physically. And you guys know I love working out, going to the gym. And so there's that too, right? And so you look at your body and you go, well, I've been working out for so many months and I don't feel like I look the part. At least is what I've been saying to myself, until I've been catching myself with that. And to a degree, this is what we do, especially as women. We never look at ourselves and admire who we are, or give ourselves grace for who we are, And so I wanted to share that with you guys and talk about self-criticism, because, again, it's fair game regardless of who you are. We all do it. And it's because it's an internal thing that happens, no one can come and yank us out of that state. So sometimes it can go on forever and ever and ever and ever before, we wake up to it. And sometimes we never wake up to it. Sometimes it also shows up in our dialogue and how we speak and some of the things we say. And if we're so fortunate enough to have people that can give us positive feedback, then we can, then we can become aware of it and we can choose to do something about it. But self-criticism is terrible. It's terrible. It's one of those things that, that just eats at you and happens so frequently. And for me, it's been my biggest block in life, because let me tell you, it's not just for the physical part. It's not just on the professional part. In my experience, this can also present itself as a huge, huge, huge block in our life. It can prevent us from moving forward, from taking the steps and action steps that we need to in order to go after things, in order to line up with the things that we want, in order to give ourselves permission, right, to explore different things in life. Because if we're constantly belittling ourselves, right, badgering ourselves, right, beating up on ourselves, we don't have that positive, outlook in life. It shows up in a negative outlook of life, because we are not holding ourselves to standards that we think we are worthy of, right? We're not holding ourselves to those standards. Therefore, it presents itself as a block in our life. And so for me, for a very long time, this is what has been a block in my life. It has prevented me from going after the things that I knew for a very long time that I wanted to do, because I didn't have the belief in myself to do them. I was always looking at the negative aspects of myself instead of looking at, hey, perhaps, look, you are doing a good job today and you're learning something, and you are, you have the willingness to try something, and that's great. Instead of, right, turning that into a positive and talking to ourselves in a positive way, I was always the person that was always looking at myself negatively. And I know how that feels. I know how that can impact someone, someone's well-being, someone just on a personal level. And so I wanted to share that perspective with you guys, and hopefully, to just shed some light on this, because again, it takes us to pull ourselves out of that rut of criticizing ourselves. If we never give ourselves the allowance, right, and the permission to go after things, because we're constantly belittling ourselves, guess what? We really can't point the finger at anyone else and say they are to blame for our circumstances, right? Because this is what we do, right? This is what we do. We engage in these behaviors that say, oh, so-and-so did it to me. Oh, so-and-so, this reason is the reason why I can't do this. But if we turn that internally and look at our behaviors, right? And some of the habits that we have and some of the things that we do, not in a critical way, by the way, because that's the point here. We want to look at ourselves objectively without judgment. This is what affords us the clarity to see through our behaviors. And so for me, again, I have to be candid with you guys. I wasn't able to do that for myself this past week, but that's okay. It showed up in my dialogue. And so other people were able to give me that feedback, which then, what kind of said to me, okay, I need to pay attention to this. Again, it's not about beating yourself up. It's about looking at yourself through the lens of compassion, and by also looking at yourself objectively. If you're really looking to make the change, right, and looking to improve upon these behaviors, we have to get to a place where we are willing to look at ourselves objectively and not with judgment. Because the thing with judgment is it clouds our vision. It presents itself just like self-criticism. If we're judging ourselves and we're criticizing ourselves, we can't see through our issues clearly, right? We can't see through what it is that's hindering us. We can't really see what it is that is preventing us from taking those steps, right? Or maybe taking a chance, or maybe taking that leap of faith, or whatever the case might be in your story. So self-criticism, oh my goodness, it's just one of those things where, if I could personally highlight this for people where I could see it, and you know what the irony of this whole thing is, that I can really identify it for people. I can really, I've gotten to the point where I could tune in and hear it in people. But again, when it comes to us, this is why I say it's really important to look at ourselves objectively and really bring some level of awareness around our behaviors and patterns and just what it is that we're doing and how that is presenting itself in our life. The presentation is so crucial, because this is how you know if this thing is in service to you or if it's not, right? If it's hindering you, preventing you from taking steps, then it is not presenting itself in a way that serves you. However, if it is serving you, then hey, this is something that I have mastered, or I'm mastering, and it's smooth sailing, and I'm moving forward, and I feel happy, and I feel great about the results that I'm seeing in my life. And those things are great. It is flowing, and it's amazing. So that's kind of how you can tell the difference between how something presents itself in your life, how it's showing up in your life, and if you're really willing to do the work that is necessary. And this is where the shadow work comes in. So the shadow aspect is looking at your root cause, right? Looking at where these things come from. Where is the source? And why is it happening? This is how you can dive into that unconscious part of yourself to see the connections, right? And how it shows up as a shadow in your life. Because when it's a shadow and you're not aware of it, it will continue to impact you for the rest of your life without you having the level of awareness that you need around it in order to work through that thing, right? And so this is why I talk about the shadow work a lot. And so for me, in that self-reflection that I did, I could see where the root cause was. And the importance of seeing that too is that you don't think of yourself as somebody who's just, destined to feel these things or to experience these experiences. You can understand right away where this stems from. And you can also see the possibility of working through the thing and being able to create a new sense of reality for yourself, right? And so this is why it's important to do the shadow work. This is why it's important to identify where the things are rooted from and how you can make that change, because everything is possible to change, right? It may not be possible to change at once because that's a very demanding ask on yourself. Think about it. It took us a lifetime to be wired this way. It's going to take us some time to unwire some of those behaviors, right? And so but in the shadow context of doing the work, when you can identify, at least for me, this is where I've done a lot of my most transformative work, because once you understand the connection of your behaviors, then you can begin to see a path forward. A doorway opens up for you, right? And it's like, oh gosh, I see now why I did what I did. I see why I do what I do. I understand the connection. And I also know that I have the tools to be able to make the changes that I desire. So again, it's so important to dive into the shadow and do this work for yourself, okay? So I just wanted to share my perspective on self-criticism, and hopefully this has been helpful to you guys. I know we all deal with it on a very personal level. Hopefully this has been insightful to you guys. And again, as I always say, I only get 30 minutes. I wish I had longer to talk about this topic, but I only get 30 minutes here. So I'm going to wrap this up today, but hopefully this episode was helpful to you all in some way, insightful in another, or enlightening in some way. I always like to say that. And as always, please remember to continue to spread your light. And also remember that light exists within you. Okay? As always, love and light, peace and blessings. Have a fantastic weekend, guys. I can't wait to chat with you guys on my next episode. Bye.